Give me a 3, 2, 1. Hey, my name's Ed Fortunato, and today I'm going to give a presentation for lost communications and flight procedures for Professor Clark for Aviation 320 instrument flight. Next slide, please. So there are a couple overarching principles on lost communications that you need to keep into consideration. The very first one is the FAA does not consider lost communications an emergency procedure. In the 21st century, that's even more apropos. The chances of you getting full lost communications is very, very small. And if you follow the published procedures outlined in the FAR, you'll have a safe flight and a safe landing because there's communication that's done in it through the procedures. Starting with a pre-flight, the FAA regulation is that you should know everything about the flight that you're about to embark on. So that includes doing a thorough pre-flight analysis of how you're going to depart the airport, how you're going to fly en route, and how you're going to land at the other destination. Some of the considerations that you'll have on the route is how you're going to depart the airfield. Again, you can fly 0-0 if you want to take off like that. So if you're flying the departure procedure or whether you've got clearance from ATC to do something special, that's what you should fly. En route, at the altitude, you need to look at the different considerations flying. One of the things that they say to do in your pre-flight planning is to have a sectional in addition to the ELA, so you can look at the obstacles around, the terrain, and make sure that you fully understand what the different altitudes are in the different sectors, what the MOCAs are, what the MIAs are, MSAs, MCAs, and be familiar with that through each phase of the flight. And then clearance. What are your limits that ATC gives you? And when they put you into when they give you a clearance, make sure it's an appropriate clearance with an expected further time or expected altitude or something of that nature. If they send you into a holding pattern, there should be an expect further clearance time. In case you lose communications, you know what you should be doing. So the route, the altitude, and the clearance are the three things that you really need to spend a lot of time in the pre-flight planning working through to make sure that you are prepared in case of an inadvertent, lost communications. Another thing that we'll talk about today is whether you're IMC or VMC. The procedures are a little bit different. And then also, the FAR prescribes communications procedures in 91.185, and you follow those. The only time you deviate from that is if you've got more restrictive procedures or further clarifications in the terminal procedures publications for each of the different airfields. Next slide, please. So again, it's not an emergency procedure. So the first thing you need to do is remain calm and figure out what's going on. You learn in the very basics of private piloting, use the DECIDE course of action analysis. So the first thing, detect what's going on. What is the problem? Probably there's a pilot error or there's something de minimis that can be rectified within the cockpit. Am I unable to transmit? Am I unable to receive? Is it just an internal communications between the pilot and the co-pilot that's the issue? Or do you have a complete communications failure? Those are the things that you first want to detect. The next thing is estimate. Why? What went wrong? Is my headset not working? Did it not get plugged in properly? Did I just dial in the wrong frequency? Look at your COM 1, look at your COM 2. What are some of the alternatives that you have? Again, this is the year 2020. You've got a cell phone. Try utilizing that. Call 911. Call the flight service station. Use a VOR. There's a lot of different opportunities and a lot of different options to try to reestablish communications once you identify what it is. Identify actions. You've got two people probably in the cockpit, so figure out who should do what. Don't overload the pilot in command. Separate it. Let the person flying fly. Let somebody else try to do the analysis and figure out what's the best way to try to communicate or ensure that you're able to follow the procedures properly to land at the airfield that you filed for. D is for do. Let ATC know you have a problem. Obviously, if you can't communicate with them, it's a full communications failure. Go to 7600 and squawk that on the transponder. Transmit on guard, 121.5. Everybody should be monitoring that in their backup radio. They might be able to transmit, what you're doing and communicate to ATC, and then evaluate your next steps. Through each part of the flight, what went right, what's going to happen next, who needs to know, how do you perform it, and again, that's going to be based on your pre-flight planning and the FAR publications. Next slide. So the easiest thing is if you're VMC. If you lose communication and you're VMC, stay VMC. It's not an emergency, don't turn it into one. So maintain cloud clearances, fly VMC and land at the first, as soon as practicable, the first airport that's suitable. So you don't need to land in a field, you don't need to land at an airstrip that's got no communications devices. Once you're VMC, or if you're following the flight path that that you're cleared for, and you're IMC but you become VMC, don't go back into the clouds. Stay VMC, find a suitable airport, land, and then once you land, go call ATC or flight service and close out your IFR flight plan, let them know what happened so they don't launch search and rescue on you and they know what's going on. Next slide. A little bit more to it if you're IMC. So we talked a little bit about route, altitude, and clearance. You go through the same, those are the same three categories that you need to kind of go through with a little bit more discretion. So what was the last ATC clearance? What were they asking you to do? So if they were vectoring you, and they were vectoring you to a fix, what you do then is you just go straight to that fix. So you don't have to follow the exact route that you were going to try to get there. Go direct to the fix and then fly the procedure as it's been briefed. If ATC gives you an expected route, then you will do that. So it's the last thing that ACT told you to do. And lastly, just fly the flight plan that you have filed. Again, in complete communication failure, ATC is going to expect you to do either what they told you to do or what you told them you were going to do. And it might be even a combination. You expect further clearance, and then from there you go ahead and fly the flight plan that you were going to do. Altitude follows the same protocol. What was the last assigned altitude? If they told you, climb to 7,000 feet and in 10 more minutes, go to 8,000 feet, do just that. And then stay at the higher altitude at 8,000 feet. You need to take into consideration minimum IFR altitudes throughout the route. So if you come across a fix and there's a MIA or an MCA, then climb to that altitude if it's higher than the one that you're at. Obviously that makes sense. If you're flying into an area where there's hazardous terrain, you want to be above it. And then again, I mentioned earlier, if they give you an expected altitude, then fly what they told you to fly. So use common sense, fly what they said, and stay at the higher altitude to avoid any sort of flight into terrain. And then clearance. Do what they told you to do. And make sure that when they give you instructions, that there is a further clearance time established with it. As I said earlier, if they're going to put you into holding pattern, it should be, it's not open-ended. So at what point in time do you depart the holding pattern so that you can continue to fly? If you get to your initial approach fix early, again, enter the holding pattern and fly it until you're able to depart at the further clearance time and land at your ETA. You want to try to get everything as exact as you possibly can in accordance with the route that you originally planned, so that you're able to follow the flight plan and they're able to follow you in the event that you've got lost communications. So these are the processes that you go to. Additionally, on the clearance, you could shoot any approach that you want. So whatever you feel comfortable with, depending on the situation, they're going to clear the airspace. ATC is going to clear the airspace. Then you fly the approach that you want, and then make a safe landing. Next slide. So, in review, it's not an emergency procedure. There's a FAR process in the regulations that you should follow. If you're VMC, stay VMC. If you're IMC, follow the procedures. And then, as I said right here, lost communications is not an emergency, so don't make it one. Are there any questions?
Yeah. Can you divert to an alternate airport if you've lost communication?
Well, that's a good question. So why would you want to go to an alternate to begin with? And I propose that you are IMC, you're a hard IMC, and you don't have any understanding what the minimums or what the weather is going to be at the airfield. You come down to decision height or your MDA, and you have to execute a missed approach. In that case, obviously, you go to your airfield, do your alternate as filed, and they'll know that you're going to be doing the same thing. Fly the prescribed airways and stay at the appropriate MIA. If coming in, let's just say that you're able to hear, but you can't transmit, you identified that earlier on, so that may be a reason that you're going to divert to an alternate as well. So yes, you obviously can. At the end of the day, you want to be able to stay safe and fly another day. So thank you very much. That concludes my presentation.